anyone have any questions about it? Oh, yeah.
When a patient's gained access to your records, is this indefinite, or is there any particular period after which things have to be reviewed, or is that
No.
or is it that it gets access forever?
Okay, let me just ask one question. Are you talking from a patient perspective, or are you talking from a clinician's perspective, or a manager's perspective, or any?
Both really, but more of a clinician's.
Okay, from a clinician's perspective. Okay, from a clinician's perspective, I actually think that the more open and transparent we are in what we do, the more effective services are going to be. So I actually want patients to be able to see as much as is reasonably possible. And legislation and all those things have to be taken into account. And I think the culture of the local population is very important, and also the culture of the practice and how comfortable the clinicians and the management in the practice are. But in an ideal world, I want the information to be available for as long as possible. There is one proviso, and that is that as long as patients understand the responsibility that goes with it, and I think if the responsibility is not there, then there's an issue. What do I mean by that? Well, it might be that you're well today, but 5 years down the line you suddenly become psychotic. Well, clearly I've got to switch it off then, because in your best interests. So that's about you and your health. If something in your health happens where I suddenly think the situation has now changed and it's no longer in your best interest to have access, then that might be a situation where I might change. I've got to add, that's not happened up till now at all. Other scenarios, what happens if you as a wife are being beaten up by the husband, and wife comes in, sees one of the partners, and she's frightened to death because when she goes home, the husband's going to turn around and say, I want to see what you said to the doctor. Scary stuff, but as doctors we actually know about this kind of stuff, and we've got to start thinking along those lines and start thinking what's in the best interest of the patient. And the patient might be frightened and say, I can't tell you because I'm going to go home and I can't lie to my husband. Well, that's okay. You've told me enough, I'm switching it off. And you can tell your husband the doctor's decided that. And if he's got a problem, he can come with. He actually doesn't have any issue, but you can imagine the scenario, can't you? Every new way of doing things has opportunities and it has risks. The big risk with this one is that those records that have always been inside the GP practice are now accessible anywhere. And that brings opportunities and risks, and one of those is about the battered wife. And what does that mean? Child protection is another one. Battered child, and what does that mean? And again, that's why if we can have things like the local care record board, that means that there is other expertise coming in and other bits of intelligence coming in that can help support that partnership of trust. I come back to what's critical here is a partnership of trust between the clinician and the patient. Then we're more likely to be in a better place. Those are the sort of two things that come to my mind straight away. I don't want it to become difficult. I don't want patients to have to come once a year just so that they can touch base with us, so that they can sign some form. Why? What does it achieve? Why 1 year? Why not 1 year and 2 days? That's my view, but I'm open to suggestions. Does anyone have anything?
Well, the reality is they're allowed to access the records anytime, anyhow. This is just making it more easy, easier.
I mean, have you ever had a situation where you've had conflict between two GPs in the same practice? One might think that yes, the patient should have access, and the other might think no, they shouldn't.
No,
what have you done?
We've got a really good practice, dare I say, where we've got a very, very open relationship, very good relationship between all the partners and the nurses, and in fact all the clinicians and staff as well. So we've not had that issue. It would be quite interesting to find out what happens, and of course the patients have a really important role in this. I think the worst thing that you can do is keep the patient out and say, no, we will decide, because that will tell volumes to a patient about what's going on inside the practice. And that's why having an active PPG, patient participation group, and constantly keeping them involved with things, and trying to understand how that partnership of trust works. And if as a practice you started to think this is breaking down the partnership of trust between the practice and the patients, then you might want to take a view on that. But I would argue that it's not going to be record access that's going to break it. It'll be some mistake that happens and the patient comes to harm and issues that come out as a result of that.
I'm just thinking, because we're such a large practice and we've got so many GPs and so many nurses, to plus we use GP locums, and it's just making sure that everybody's aware
Yeah,
that patients could have access
Yeah.
to their records. I mean, a locum coming in and working for us, say for a couple of weeks,
yeah.
and then that's it and off they go,
I,
aren't aware that actually
Right.
our patients may have
Yeah,
access to their records.
I do, as you can imagine, I have meetings all over the place, and so I use a lot of locums.
Mm.
And the practice manager will just have a quick 5 words with them and say, by the way, the patient can access it. But for the point that you've just mentioned, patients can see the record anyway. It's irrelevant whether you've got access to records or not. All this does is makes it more apparent and more. So patients, and in fact, you know, for a few years now, clinicians have changed the way they write things into a form that's, you know, more appropriate for patients to view. So it's become much less of an issue, and the training of doctors now and nurses now is such that it's much less of a problem. I've not seen it. What I've found is that the clinicians who don't particularly want to get involved in this don't say no, they just don't get involved in it.
We're also highlighting on patients' records that we do have access, so locums should be able to see.
Yeah.
On the summary
Well,
page.
let's just go on to the clinical system. Sorry, let me just. If you just keep talking, but on the. I'll just bring up the internet.
You mentioned about the care for loved ones. I just wondered,
The
care for loved ones, I think was the heading you had.
yes, care for loved ones. Yeah.
What sort of lengths you went to assess capacity in those
Yeah.
patients?
The challenge that I've got is. The challenge that I've got is around the Bengali patients who don't speak a word of English, and they turn up to A&E and go pain. And you know, you know as much as I that God, if that clinician could have just seen that record, they'd have so much more information about the patient. And it's a challenge for me because how do I get consent from somebody? I've lost it now. It doesn't matter what they. How do I get consent from somebody who doesn't speak a word of English? And yet, from my point of view, the jump in the quality of care that they would get by having the access. The other group of people are patients with dementia, learning problems in nursing homes and the like. And in fact, on that one, if you're interested, I'm doing a talk in 2 weeks' time on dementia. Not about record access, it's actually going to be an old age psychiatrist who wants to come and talk to GPs. I've suggested that I'd like to talk about what we're doing in general practice and get our FY2 doctor to talk about the dementia reviews that he's been doing. I'm going to get a couple of spouses of patients with dementia talking about some of the difficulties they've had with lack of information. I'm going to be talking about the map of medicine, but in there talk a little bit about the potential opportunity that could be had if a spouse could see the record, and then the other one is also about the carers in the nursing home, if they could access the records. And again, the way I'm approaching that is involving the local care record board so that they can then start to think about what procedures do we need to put in place. I was talking to a manager at a nursing home about this, and she said, oh God, you know, we can't do it. And I said, well, you're right. But on the other hand, you can give morphine to these patients. And I would argue that's a lot more dangerous, especially in Hyde, than giving access to records. You know, and surprise, surprise, well, I never thought about that, Doc. And I go, well, actually, if you can give morphine to the patient, this shouldn't be any more difficult. The issue is about what procedures have you got in place and what checks and balances are there. And it might be that there's something that the PCT needs to do or someone in social services needs to do to ensure that the patients are safe. But let's move away from it's impossible to it might be possible.
So do you not do that at the moment?
No, because at the moment the consent process is the patient who has to give consent. Absolutely, and that's really, really important. It's not about me. I might think that you could really benefit from it, but actually it's not me who determines it. You've got to go through the process and sign the consent. It's an explicit consent process. And that's because some of the challenges are ones that I can't determine for you. You've got to determine them yourself. You've got to weigh it up, what the advantages are and what the disadvantages are, and on balance, what you think is right for you and your family. That's the crux of it. It's really, really important. I can make it available, I can provide all the information, but you decide what's right for you.